Welcome to Life is for Living channel. I'm your host, Kylee Buckley, and I'm here with David J. Riddell from the School of Living Wisdom. Today, we're going to talk about memory assistance. David, what's a really good way on how we can recall things and remember things? Because you've got a great memory, great mind. How did you do it?
Slowly and painfully, and made lots of mistakes, but I'm much sharper now, Kylie. I have various techniques that really help me to have a much better memory. For example, when I'm reading a book, I used to be atrocious. I could finish the whole book, couldn't name the characters, couldn't tell you much about the details of the story. It was like a sieve. Everything went right straight through and it caught very little. So, one technique, the first one I'll teach right now, is that at the end of every chapter you should stop, and before you go to the next chapter, just ask yourself two or three questions, because then you can put it in your short-term memory. And so, what were the names of the characters I've just been reading about? What were the dates, the key dates that I've just been reading? What was the theme or the point of that chapter? And where does it fit into the big story and into the big picture? That might take you 5 minutes just pondering and thinking about it. And when you feel like you've regurgitated it just a little bit, then you're ready for the next chapter. But if you don't take that moment to look backwards, you'll find that the next chapter will often eradicate the details of the first chapter.
Mm.
You didn't take time just to put a handle on the drawer. And that's what the memory is all about. It's don't close the drawer until you've put a handle on it. And this is the mistake that many students and people make. They open the drawer, they pile it full of knowledge, whether it be from a podcast or from a friend telling about their story or a book they've read. And then as soon as they've done that, they shut the drawer. And then blow me down, they can't open it again a day or a week or a year later. There was no handle put on it.
Right.
And that's why I'm quite good at remembering names. I try to put a handle on the name as soon as I hear it. And so Dean uh, becomes the movie star, and who died in an automobile crash in the 50s. Then there is Julius Caesar, and Julius for July, and Caesar Augustus, Augustus for August. And you make these connections with names that ring a bell. What's the bell the name rings? Who was the first person you knew by that name? You link it to your prototype.
Mm-hmm.
I had a cousin called Penny at school, and so I can remember a Penny by that name, or I can remember a Penny because I think that she's brassy or she has a round shape.
Mm-hmm.
Now, those memory hooks are personal and private and sometimes very funny, but they're not for sharing. They're just the way your brain reconnects to that name. And so we all know that if I gave you a number, you wouldn't remember it unless you could hook it to something.
Mm-hmm.
So if I gave you a number like 00700, what would you hook it to?
James Bond.
Of course. And so right there, all you have to do is remember James Bond, and there was a double O after it as well as before it.
Mm.
And so straight away, you've got it. If you gave me a number like 318, I would remember that I once lived at a house at 318.
Mm-hmm.
If you gave me 394, I had a girlfriend living at 394. And if you gave me 395, I would say it was a girlfriend plus one. And so memory hooks work in all sorts of ways, but they're very powerful, and they're very interesting. I have a brother called Graham, and I have a sister called Gail. And so I always remember the bottom G and the top G of the score on a music score. And I remember where my brother Frank fits for the F. And I remember that D for David carries the whole treble clef score. And so those are the ways. And I have a sister called Cindy with a C. And of course, she's middle C because she was in the middle. And so that's how we make memory hooks. And I remember complaining in my years as a horticultural student that I could never remember the names of the three cedars. But an old gardener said to me, "Well, it's simple." And he lowered his arms. The deodar is droopy, and so the droopy branch cedar is the deodar. And then he said, the ascending branches are the Atlantic, and A is for Atlantic and A is for ascending. And then the cedar of Lebanon has level branches, and I'm sure you can work out where I'm going with that one.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that 60-second explanation, I've never ever forgotten the three cedars and their names. But the interesting thing is that memory hooks are one way of doing it, but if you make them into poetry, you can also do it as well.
Mm.
And when I came across a plant with a dreadful name, and a lot of them have got dreadful Latin names, when I came upon Agapanthus umbellatus, I thought, how the dickens am I going to remember that? Yeah. Yeah. So I made a joke out of it. And I won't tell you the joke, but the joke means that I can always remember
Mm.
Aggie the Panthus, Bellatus. And it also has a meter to it, a rhythm. And that's very helpful too. And
Mm.
I recall from Sunday school years, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, hold the horse while I get on. A child's only got to hear that once and they'll have it for life.
Oh.
And this is the kind of thing we're talking about. You train your memory. Everybody has the potential for a great memory. Very few, perhaps less than 10%, actually train their memory. And the thing that I am still somewhat resentful about regarding schooling and primary schooling and secondary schooling is that they really abused us. And I believe that all students are abused who are not taught to operate their memory before they're tested. What is the point of firing knowledge at a child's mind, but never giving him shelving and stacking shelving, and so that he can recall it at will? It all hits the wall of his mind and falls to the floor in an amorphous heap. And then you give him a test and ask him to recall these answers. Well, of course, he can't do it because he never was taught how to operate his memory. And the thing about a test is the great lie is they're testing your ability. They're actually not. They're testing your recall.
Yeah.
And so many students have decided they're dumb or they're stupid or they're thick or they're slow because they had no idea how to recall under pressure. And so they scored poorly, then they got discouraged, and then they gave up. I know because it happened to me, and I watched it happen to hundreds of other children and teenagers as they scored repeatedly below 80%, 70%, 60%. And I understood that, in fact, they'd just spent a year studying that topic. Why were they only scoring such low marks? And the answer is they could not recall, and they could not recall under duress, which, of course, every exam is. So it's a problem, and it's not being addressed. As far as I know, people are still not being taught what kind of memory they've got. Did you know that there are 4 basic ways or kinds of memory, Kylie? And we all use all 4, but most people have an ability to be much better at one of these methods than the other 3.
Okay.
Obviously, the auditory memory is good for music, and it's good for poetry, and it's good for literature, and it's good for listening to lectures. But a lot of people don't have a strong auditory memory. They can't even sing in tune. They
Mm-hmm.
can't remember the single verse of a single poem they've ever heard. But they're very visual, they're highly visual. And when I'm teaching church people, I say to them, if you're visual, you need to get the Bible that has the little thread-like images, because the images will help you to pin it down quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Get an illustrated Bible if you need to. Whereas the auditory people often go for a Bible translation that has meter and rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very strong on meter and rhythm, even if they don't know what the terms are, because if they're auditory, they use it and they need it. And so they say that most men are strongly visual. I don't believe that. I've met a lot of men who are much more auditory. And I do know that if you are auditory, it's a great difficulty to live and love a person with an unpleasant voice.
Mm-hmm.
But if he or she is beautiful, a gorgeous, handsome specimen, it doesn't matter so much because the looks outweigh the voice. So we are sensitive and more sensitive in one way or the other. Some people have stopped listening to me already because they don't like my voice. They're auditorily sensitive. Other people would stop listening because they don't like my look, because they're visually very sensitive. But there is a third kind of memory that is also worth knowing about. It's the kinesthetic memory.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the person who doesn't remember what they do not engage with. So the best way that they have to remember something is to engage with it, use it, put their hands on it, explain it to somebody else, teach it to somebody else. They have to get involved.
Mm-hmm.
Unless they're kinesthetically involved, they're not going to remember very much at all. And those people gravitate towards the kitchen or the workshop or the shed. They gravitate towards tools. They gravitate towards the sewing machine or the knitting needles or the hammer and nails or the chainsaw, because the way they work is much more by touch and by kinesthesia.
Mm-hmm.
There's a fourth kind, which I won't spend time on, but the fourth kind is the person who just needs to get the overall, the big picture, and then any detail you ask them, they can work it out.
Right.
Once they know how the language works, once they know how horticulture works, once they know how the periodic table of elements actually work,
Mm-hmm.
once they know how the atmosphere works, they can work out the answer to the question just by having that big picture. So that's the kind of Albert Einsteinian memory. Interesting to note that Albert Einstein himself confessed to having a very poor memory, but he said, I do like to get the big picture before anything else. And I have students like that. They want to know the bird's eye view of the whole course even before they sit in to listen in on a lecture. And I have total respect for that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm that way myself.
Mm-hmm.
Once I see how it all fits together, then I'm fine.
Yeah. I think I might be that way too, actually. Not that I'm an Einstein. But when we did the course, although maybe I am, when we did that course, you were talking about the shelvings in your mind. Hey, we all have to
Mm.
create shelvings.
Well, the periodic table of elements is a shelving. Once you understand atomic numbers and the electrons and how the electrons shape the element, then you've got shelving up in your mind. And once you understand the difference between a hybrid name, a species name, a genus name, and a common name, then you've got shelving for learning plant names.
Mm-hmm.
And once you understand osmosis and photosynthesis. Once you understand pests and diseases, then you've got the shelving needed to carry out successful horticulture.
Right.
And once you understand how the Old Testament and the New Testament relate together, then
Mhm.
you got the shelving to teach and to grasp and to understand the whole biblical narrative.
Yeah.
So I do like that shelving. I think what it means is that you can process knowledge much faster.
Mhm.
And when my people go into a family or business situation to sort it out and to do troubleshooting, these are the people I've trained in living wisdom. Because they've been trained in all the concepts of living wisdom, and because those concepts are so potent, then they can immediately assess the dynamic and what's going wrong and what's needed to fix it because they've got the shelving up. They know the cross matching of unbearable feelings, they know projection, they know cognitive dissonance, they know a toxic religion, they know toxic psychotherapy, they can distinguish it from healthy psychotherapy. All the shelving is in place, you see, and one of the best ways to get the shelving up is to get a glossary going. In fact, you're only really as good at your expertise as the glossary that you've got sorted in your own head. Mm.
Interesting. Yeah, it's true. And whatever topic it is that you specialize in, it is very true. Well, thank you, David, for your wonderful wisdom again, guys. And this is all about memory hooks, association. And how do you learn? What is the best way for you to remember things? Is it by doing it, hearing it, seeing it, or just getting
Interesting, isn't it?
it? Thanks, guys. Thanks, David.
Thank you.